Good morning to you, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Los Angeles, California, United States of America. March 26, 2021, speaking on behalf of the remarkable, mind-blowing, courageous civil disobedience movement in the country of Burma today. Let me start today by acknowledging, honoring those boys and girls, men and women, nuns and monks, who have died at the hands of MASAC, Ming Online's State Administration Council, MASAC, Burma's Taliban, Burma's Khmer Rouge, Burma's Boko Haram, MASAC, Ming Online, Burma's Saddam Hussein. Sadly, this man and the men and women in the ecosystem of evil, formerly known as the Tamada, the Burmese word for military. They're no longer in the military. They've so dishonored the institution started by General Aung San Suu Kyi's father, the honorable men and women who have embodied the dignity of the Tamada for decades. Ming Online has cracked, period, any association with the military, the armed forces. He is a bona fide international terrorist, and it should be known worldwide that the institution formerly known as the Tamada, the military, is no longer in armed forces. It is armed and it's a force, but it's a terrorist armed force organization. MASAC, the acronym, Ming Online, State Administration Council. Let us embed, sadly, the acronym as we would Al-Qaeda, ISIL, Boko Haram, Khmer Rouge, Taliban, the Taliban of Burma, MASAC. They assassinate, they kill, they maim, they torture, they terrorize. The man and the institution is insane. The criminal court in The Hague should act furiously, not only indicting this organization, but sending out people underground to capture, like they did Milosevic in Bosnia, capture Ming Online and the henchmen and henchwomen in the terrorist group MASAC. Take him to The Hague, try him in front of the world court, and show the world the stealth of ethics over evil. Two months into this revolution of confronting evil and terror, we can't speak enough about the bravery of the people of Myanmar today. The ethnic groups who've been in armed revolution and revolt and self-preservation for decades with the terrorist group MASAC, they know what it means to live under unremitting tyranny. The people of Burma, for 33 years plus since 1947, or essentially in 62 when Ne Win in his military coup took over in a succession of dictators, the people of Burma, the Catholics, the Christians, the Jews, the atheists, the agnostics, and the Buddhists, and all the various sects within Buddhism, including the nuns and the monks, they know firsthand what it means to live under tyranny, under horror, deprivation, and danger night and day. And you people, remarkably, have chosen a revolution of the human heart, a revolution of consciousness, dedicating your lives to the overcoming of your own fear, greed, and delusion, rather than confronting the terrorist group MASAC, and previously the SLORC, and so on and so forth, with weapons and guns and grenades. For 33 years, it's been a revolution of human consciousness to confront the deep evil of ignorance embodied in the terrorist group MASAC. Remarkable, epic. Aung San Suu Kyi, we know, won the Nobel Peace Prize, but it was really the prize for the people. She, the embodiment of the revolution of consciousness, and the people, the revolutionaries who embodied the dignity of that particular struggle. and still do to this day. It brings us up to the moment, March 26, 2021. Questions that are being asked of me, both friends, the media, text. Alan, could you see this coming? We're in shock, we're in disbelief. Yes, we could see this coming. It's been going on for decades. Ask any of the ethnic groups of what they've lived under for decades. It's not anything new, but the Burmese, yes, they've known this. They have seen this for decades, what it means to live under the tyranny of horror. How many people disappear? How many people go to insane prison? Or any of the other 36 different gulags and prisons around the country, plus the ones we don't know about. What they've encountered in interrogations, under torture, under the most extreme conditions. It's been well documented by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Every civilized democracy in the country knows the evil of the gulags under Masak. It is horror beyond horror. And yet, the people have continued to brave up with resilience that we have not seen in modern times. Yes, there are examples around the world, but what we're seeing today in Burma to confront this evil ecosystem known as Masak is just breathtaking. Could we see it coming? What can we do? We're in shock, we're in disbelief. The international community, the United Nations, the EU, the G7, America, Canada, Australia, other civilized countries, they're doing nothing except talking and sanctioning and, keeping the generals' money, a small percentage of that money. And yes, they're appropriate responses, but is it enough? I can't go into that anymore. I've said all along, it's a 911 call. And when you identify with an emergency, you embody empathy and you begin to put on the mind and body of the other the most intimate relationship that you know. Call it family. And what would you do? Empathy asks the question. There's an emergency in my house, next door, on my block, in my town, in my village, in my country. It's under siege. It's an active killer like we had in Boulder, in Atlanta. An active killer. 911. Police, military are on the spot. 2 months later, the United Nations, America, well, I think we're going to cut some of the money from the active killer. We'll embargo. We won't let them take vacations anymore in the States or the EU. We'll go to Jamaica. Maybe we should just divest a little bit of the money that we have invested in some of the corporations there. Hey, listen, don't do it anymore. Don't do it anymore. 2 months later, don't do it anymore. They've been killing and shooting 7-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 6-year-olds, tyrannizing the entire country. How many more images do we need to see? It is a pathetic international response. I don't applaud it. I would be so thoroughly disgusted, and I am disgusted. As an American and as a global citizen, I left college for the very reason I'm feeling today, the inept nature of government, driven by profit and blah, blah, blah. And we have a whole litany of endless wars. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya. It goes on and on and on and on. And yet when we have a moral crusade, an obligation to support democracy and the good people of another country, we just simply release a few words, make some stern statements, embargo, and go about drinking our wine and having sex and talking about nothing. Nothing, blah, blah, blah. So yes, on two fronts, I could see it coming. People in Burma knew it was coming, could see it coming. Could it be this evil? Could it be this evil? Well, the Third Reich, look at Rwanda. Look at Sudan. Look at Cambodia. Look at Yugoslavia. Burma's not anything new. The horror is though being televised on social media by these savants, by the radical civil disobedience movement, the protesters. They're revealing the hidden secrets of terror up close almost live. Well, it is live. These videos are capturing terror live, and the world is in disbelief and in shock. But could you imagine if we had social media at the time of World War II? Could you imagine if there were phones, smartphones, iPhones, whatever, secret little miniature phones in Dachau or in Auschwitz as the trains landed and the boys and girls and children were separated from their parents and taken their clothes off and put into these gas chambers, and they're screaming over and over and over, and the Nazis are basically smoking cigarettes and masturbating to the sound of anguish, and we had videos of that, the world would be outraged. I remember reading Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Laureate's short little memoir called Night, and how he, in the camps, was forced to work and see how these Nazis were throwing babies and children alive into ovens. And he said he rubbed his eyes in utter disbelief. And still today, when he hears and sees people talk about suffering and terror out of habit and out of love, he rubs his eyes in condition. I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. And these images coming out of Burma every day, even with the internet locked down, we're seeing firsthand Ma Sak's unbridled terrorism to the people of Burma. The bullet holes in the head of a 7-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old. The city streets, the villages are vacant, and you go out to hang your longi, your clothing, to get water from the well, and a bullet from nowhere that was made by a manufacturer in the West and sold for profit to a terrorist organization shoots from some other balcony, poised through his high fidelity scope, and shoots into the head of innocence. And we, as an international community, allow this, sanction this, designate them in some way that you cannot do this, and make terse statements at the United Nations, and yet go about the business of blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blanks, A through Z. I'm outraged. I'm shocked. It's not anything new. It's not unexpected. But the war is on in Burma. The people are speaking. Dictatorship in terror is totally unacceptable, period. And this is where it comes into the present moment for me. What do you foresee? What can be done? Will there be victory? Is there hope? Let me just spontaneously jump into these particular issues, questions that all of us are asking, all of us are thinking. When we're not feeling despairing or hopeless, we rise up in proportion to the courage that we see on the streets and in the homes of Burma. Let me just start with saying, is there hope? I see hope like I've never seen hope before. It's hard to even use the word silver lining in this case, but I do think that there's a silver lining here that's becoming more and more luminous by the day. The world, despite their impotence, they have acted in some way. There are sanctions, and the outrage is increasing. The world is unified. It's black and white. Terrorism is occurring in Burma. It's a terrorist organization. The world is referring to their behavior as terrorist organizational behavior. Sanctions have been enacted worldwide, embargoes, and even the profit mongers in oil, gas, ruby, lumber, slavery, manufacturing, all are beginning to see the heat and feel it. And they're having to cease their participation with the terrorist group Ma Sak. Okay. The hope is just to look at the reality of how things are happening right now. In the ethnic groups, the various leaders, both who are speaking, Dr. Sasa, and others who are in hiding or operating, I would prefer to say, from undisclosed locations, are at this moment unifying the ethnic groups into a federation of unified freedom fighters, and funding will come privately. I do believe that. I hear that. I do believe that. Training and funding will come. Am I advocating armed resistance? Absolutely. That's what the people want. Is there more to that armed resistance than just shoot, shoot, shoot? Yes. I'll get into that. The weaponization of Dhamma, a new term I'd like to bring forth. The war of the Sangha towards Masak, a declaration of war by the Sangha, the modernization of the language of the Dhamma, to have a point to their compassion, an arrow point on one's metta, a sword on one's panya or wisdom. Modernize the Dhamma proportionate to the complexity to deal with it. I mentioned the other day, but I think it's worth mentioning because it keeps coming through my mind, and I want to just be real to you and with you. And let me just pause here. Please be a force multiplier. Share these videos on and on and on. Share them, share them, share them. Send them to diplomats, ambassadors, senators, congresspeople. Send them into Burma. Send them to all the various Burma groups. Please share them. The other day I mentioned in Nelson Mandela's famous book, A Long Walk to Freedom, back in 1985. He had been in prison for 22 years. I think the gentleman's name was Oliver Tambo. He was the representative, very much like Dr. Sasa is at the moment, of the ANC, the African National Congress, an outlawed group named as a terrorist group by the white apartheid supremacist government in South Africa, under, I think it was Botha at the time. And Mandela snuck a letter out that his daughter read to the people of South Africa, the followers, and to the world, that essentially made a couple of comments through Oliver Tambo, which really stick in my mind and appropriate to Burma today. Make South Africa ungovernable. I mean, that's a meme, a very potent phrase that can transmit time and language and reveal to the people in an instant exactly its meaning, a meme. And you're encouraged to embody every human being in the world today who cares about democracy, not about Burma alone, who cares about democracy, who cares about the future of freedom, who cares about this 3-page document, the blueprint for civilized democracy called The Universality of Human Rights, put forth by Eleanor Roosevelt way back in the day. 30 articles of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, to live without fear and need, and all beings are born equal in dignity and in conscience. And when those qualities of being are violated, we have seen the horrors of war. And to remove from the future of life these horrors, let us embody the universality of human rights. Of course, we can extend that to environmental rights. All ethnicities, all language, irrespective of language, of religion, of economic basis, they all deserve to have freedom of mind, to live in peace, in harmony. To state the obvious, a military and a government is there to protect the people. Be clear about that. When we have been under duress and traumatized in the rupture of normalcy, we begin to have feelings like in the Stockholm Syndrome. We begin to empathize with the torturer. We begin to cower and think that shame is an appropriate response to terror. But the boys and girls in Burma have seen through those old, antiquated states of mind, although they're appropriate at times. We must rise up proportionate to the evil and bring our moral wisdom, courage to confront this evil ecosystem. The point here is make Burma ungovernable. If I were to hear Aung San Suu Kyi, if I were to hear her colleagues, some have passed away, some are still alive, the Venerable U Tin U, the Nayaka of the National League for Democracy at 92 years old. I recently saw him in Rangoon. We've been dear friends for decades. My beloved mentor and friend who passed away, one of the founders of the National League for Democracy, U Chi Mong, if I could channel him and listen to him, and my friend U Win Tin, 20 years in the Gulag in an insane prison. Other friends, Coco G, Ming Online. I could go on and on. Momo Myat. I won't say the names anymore, but they're mainlining one fact. Make Burma ungovernable. That is left to each of us in our own devices, our own intelligence, our own compassion, our own day-to-day life, not shopping, buying, listening, talking, interrelating with anyone in what I would call the evil ecosystem of the terrorist organization, the ecosystem of evil. Ecosystem of evil, E-O-E, ecosystem of evil. The infrastructure, the architecture. Another point that I'll just jump right into. I saw some weeks back on Irrawaddy. The brave journalism in Burma today is just mind-breathtakingly boggling. Right on. But there was some group, some Facebook page, some website that identified the immediate family members of the leading members of the, I wanted to say the Thamada, but it's no longer, the acronym MASAC, the terrorist group. The leading wives, daughters, uncles, dentists, doctors, nurses, priests, car repair mechanics, the ecosystem of evil at the top 1,000 people, primarily the boys and girls, the sons and daughters in universities around the world, in businesses in Japan, in colleges in Sweden, here in California, in London, in Perth, tracing these people. Let us have a website, maybe it's in development, but how easy it would be for all of us around the world who cared about Burma, how we could participate. How can we make Burma ungovernable, and how can we make dictatorship unworkable? We need to divest 1,000% immediately. All emotional support, all financial engagement, all nice talk, and begin to creatively elevate through shame and mockery and satire, dark gallows humor, identify these men and women, these boys and girls, where they shop, what cars they buy, boycott everything to do with that ecosystem of evil. Think of Singapore right now, the Switzerland of South Asia. If those banking leaders really got it, that they're participating in the continuation of genocide and ethnic cleansing and evil in Burma by allowing those funnels of digital money to be transacted from Naypyidaw or Rangoon or Mandalay to Singapore. And that was just in an instant, cut like an electricity circuit. Where did my $100 million go today, honey? Singapore had an act of conscience and chose to no longer collude with the ecosystem of evil. We cut their blood. We cut their oxygen. These are very distinct terms and phrases that I think many people hopefully are using. I hope that they will begin to use, and let them flood the universe in Burma and around the world as memes on how to participate in making Myanmar ungovernable. Shut it down. I was so impressed the other day to see the empty streets in Yangon. I was recently there. I've spent so much time in those city streets, in those hotels, in those shops, walking the villages. I've been to so many of the regions around the country, in the monasteries, and to see them empty, not just empty of life, they were filled with life. It was an act of breathtaking hiri and otapa, the Pali Buddhist words. Conscious shame. I refuse to participate in evil, withdrawing the tenacity of moha or ignorance to participate in denigration. That's a beautiful quality of restraint. And then to feel a remorse, a contraction, a regret, that what I have done is wrong according to Dhamma, according to Dana, according to Sila. It's wrong according to my Jesus, my Bible, my Allah, my truth, my spirit, my heart, my soul, my conscience. I recoil when I think I'm going to violate someone. That's an act of conscience. Those city streets in Rangoon, in Mandalay, in Moulmein, in Monhua, in Taunji, all around the country, they were filled with the radiance of Dhamma and God and spirit and metta and karuna and conscience and action. They were luminous with the declaration of freedom of speech. That silence was deafening. And that sent a message to Ma Sac. You can be sure. That's why he and his henchmen and henchwomen in Naypyidaw keep threatening prison terms, keep taking the NLD out of their homes, keep threatening civilian leaders, keep threatening and imprisoning influencers and journalists, keep torturing, keep shooting little boys and girls, because they know that they are wrong, way down deep inside. Is there hope? It is so radiant. I would say it is blinding, the hope in Burma today. Be clear of that, revolutionaries. Be clear of that. We on the outside are blinded with joy by the radiance of your courage and the ongoing resilience and fortitude and determination of putting Dhamma in Jesus and Allah, in Judaism, in atheism, in spirit, in the matrix, in dynamic action to transform evil from the fabric of consciousness, civilization, and global society. You are fighting the epic battle of every great philosophy and religion that's ever been known. There is hope because it is blinding us with radiant joy. Thank you, civil disobedience movement. Thank you, civilian dialogue movement. For 11 years prior to the CDM movement, there was a CDM movement that was infiltrating the entire country. It was called the Civilian Dialogue Movement. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and elected officials in the parliament empowered civilian leadership, not terrorist group leadership. They empowered dialogue over denigration, destruction, and violence. Dialogue, civilian dialogue movement. That was what was going on in Burma. It was also known by the Dharma of Reconciliation, but that was the intelligence of the CDM before the second incarnation of the CDM, which is the Civil Disobedience Movement. And it's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Swedish intellectuals as of today. If you look back at an podcast, I take no credit for this, but I've been such a fan of the people of Burma. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi made it clear, I'm irrelevant. It's the people. Go to Insight Myanmar and look at the courageous work of what that gentleman is doing. Joa and his team, volunteers, presenting podcasts from Myanmar to the world on what's going on, what can be done, a tireless savant in support of the people. Okay, I've been blessed to be interviewed by Joa and the Insight Myanmar podcast a couple of times. If you go back and do a search and look, I think it may have been in October 2020, when my books with my colleague and friend Fergus Harlow, Burma's Voices of Freedom, 8.5 years of work, 4 volumes of book, about 100 different political prisoners that had been released, I interviewed over those 8.5 years. They're in that book. At the end of that podcast, I said it was the people of Burma should be awarded over the last 11 years prior to this so-called military coup. They're the ones who should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. What they have endured, what they continue to bring forth is just mind-boggling. So what I'm saying here, in short, making Burma ungovernable and making this terrorist group known as Dictatorship unworkable, you are winning the war. The war is on. There's no returning. There's no compromise, it seems to me. It is too black and white at this point. Another very important point for me, and I'm going to come to a close here, because I can just get off on this and rant on. You know, my love of Burma is the diversity of the people. They took me in as a son of Dhamma, fed me, bathed me, gave me robes. I was on a deathbed for nearly 8 months when I was 30 years old in Yangon in my monastery. Breathtaking generosity. And strangers came to my room and chanted and put water into my mouth and bathed me, was a young man. And I have never, ever, I could never give back enough to the people of your country. But most of all, it's the Dhamma. And I don't mean Dhamma as Buddhism. I'm talking about Dhamma out of the container of Buddhism. I'm a very radical, rebel, maverick type. I don't fit well within orthodoxy and systems. And call it brain trauma, autism, Asperger's, Tourette syndrome, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I don't much care what people think. And it took me a long time to get to that. But what happened in Burma, the courage of the people, the mentors that took me in to help illuminate what it means to live under pressure and to keep bringing forth high radiant states of Dhamma. Do Aung San Suu Kyi, U Tinu, U Win Tain, U Win Tin, U A Mong. So many women, so many men, so many ethnic groups. I owe you my life in my soul and in my conscience. It's the Dhamma. I want to speak again here to this radical concept for me of the modernization of Dhamma. I call it the weaponization of Dhamma. We've heard about the weaponization of the virus, the weaponization of porn, the weaponization of information, but the weaponization of Dhamma is almost a contradiction. It's like, isn't Dhamma about nonviolence? And where does the Buddha and Gandhi intersect in the face of genocide? What do you do in the most extreme situations of ethnic cleansing? Where is your Dhamma when you are being taken and your wife and your daughter are being raped in front of your eyes? Will you simply sit there and embody the orthodoxy of a metta that simply radiates loving thoughts to the assailant and thoughts of compassion to your wife as you're forced to deal with the evil of rape in your face? Or what does it mean to weaponize the Dhamma, modernize the Dhamma, and not see a radical response to that evil that isn't a Dhamma? And I think that is the cutting edge right now that Burma is manifesting, because it's not just Buddhism. It's obviously the spirit of Catholicism, the spirit of Christianity, the spirit of Allah, the Muslims, the Catholics, the Jews and the Buddhists, the atheists, the agnostics, the people, the agrarian, the urbanites. everyone in Burma is uniting, and everyone in Burma is helping us around the world to unite beyond our dogma and to understand that the revolution of human consciousness is not a religious journey. It's a state of mind and concomitance of mind brought to the forefront of confronting violence and evil in an appropriate way. And this is a very important point for me of nonviolence and armed intervention, armed self-defense. What would I do as a senior Sayadaw in the Sangha in Burma today? One, I would let my Dhamma blood boil and trust in the sanctity that isn't about dosa or anger. I would say that it's a more radiant form of metta, the boiling of metta up higher into a more intense form of action beyond the normalcy of normal. It's one thing to meditate in the sanctity and the silence of a beautiful yekta in a city somewhere in Myanmar, but how different it is, as Jesus said, how easy it is to love those who love you. Even the tax collectors can do as such, okay? Take that, even in the face of genocide, even in the face of an assassin who just shot my 7-year-old daughter, where is my karuna? Where is my metta? Where is my dhamma? The people of Myanmar who are Buddhists are asking for leadership. Now, if I were a senior Sayadaw hanging in the sanctity of some cool yekta in Yangon, I would let my Dhamma blood boil. What would I do? I would think of 100 things that my fellow sister Tilashins and fellow monks from all ages, we got together in the yekta, in the monastery, and we talked out of the dogma box. We're under siege. This is like possibly, could this be a Hitler situation? Could this be a Pol Pot situation? Could this be a Rwanda situation? This gentleman, Mr. Clements, wrote a book 33 years ago called Burma, the Next Killing Fields, with a question mark. We know that the Rohingyas were ethnically cleansed. We know that our government, not the government, we know that our military, no, not the military, we know that we have a bona fide terrorist group now shooting boys and girls. We're not immune. We have an obligation both to inform and to protect, and to also inform and to protect the Sasana and the Sangha, modernize the Dhamma. This is one of the greatest gifts that we're asking in the world. Over the last 50 years of Dhamma in the world, how do you integrate this stuff into daily life? Has been, yoga off the mat, meditation off the cushion, bypassing the phrase that was in, I think it was brought forth by the psychologist John Wellwood. How do you go from meditation in a yekta to full combat without sacrificing your monastic vows and fight the good fight? Where's the Ottama in all of us? Where's the General Aung San in us? Is the Buddha really the Buddha who just simply stayed passive, or is the Buddha on fire with a radiant new expression of intensity? Why do I spend time like this? Burma is one of the great sacred places in the world that's embodied, that's holding modern day Dhamma. We all know what happened in Tibet. The decimation of the people, the genocide of the Tibetans, the persecution of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's gone, except in small places in India and around the world, primarily by the courage of the people and the radiance of the Dalai Lama. Is Burma going to be the next Tibet? Yes. Snap out of dogma, world and Sangha. We love you. Modernize the Dhamma. I'm not saying what that should look like, but the boiling should take place. Convene, talk, and think of creative ways. Some of the things that come to mind, I've been saying now for a couple of months. Cease allowing anyone in the ecosystem of evil. Know in Burma especially the daughters and the sons of the cronies that do business with the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. Know those people who make their clothes, who sell them bags and jewelries and cars. Know the dentist of Ming Online, his family. Know everyone in the ecosystem, the architecture of evil. And you as nuns and monks, especially the senior Sayadaws, let it be known in your own silent declaration throughout the entire country, cease and desist and no longer participate. That's called, I am no longer willing to collude with evil based upon my need to embody the dogma of a belief that is really nothing other than, in my humble estimation, ignorance in dynamic wrong action. That's called, for lack of better terms, complicity with one's own stupidity. Study who these people are. That's why I keep going on. Where is the website that we can see the ecosystem of evil? Everyone, we want to know the top 500 leaders in Masak. Where are they? What are their names? What are their nicknames? What are their addresses in Burma? What are their social media handles? Are they on Twitter or Facebook? Are they now in Clubhouse, on Gab? Find them. Find all the nicknames for these people. What is their email addresses? What are their phone numbers? Where do they get petroleum? Dry the ecosystem up from collusion. Where do they do business? Where do they shop? Where do they get their cars repaired? Where do the military uniforms come from? Where does the ammunition come from? All around the world, let us see who are the businesses that do business, the banks, the leaders of the banks, the board, the corporate leaders of the banks that do business with the evil empire. Let us know them by name in Singapore, in Switzerland, in New York, in China. Let us know who the people are by name, address, phone number, email. You can be sure when we see them, oh my God, just like the streets were silent, let's create a deep, unremitting silence so that their life link to the world and each other is drying up. Money, time, and energy. Back to the Sangha, a creative expression. Don't allow any boy and girl that's connected to the evil system to ordain. Don't let them even to come into the monastery. Refused politely, thank you very much for your dana, but we don't want it. You don't want my dana? Dana is an act of kusala. You're denying me of kusala, you monk? We are developing our own kusala, and we refuse to participate in evil. What I would encourage you is to turn around, take your money, and feed the people who have been courageously no longer wanting to work as civil servants, as teachers, as medics, as nurses, as doctors, as car repair, as hotel personnel, as shopkeepers, as merchants. Feed them. They stop work, and may we encourage you as an act of Dhamma Kusala. May we encourage you to stop work. Join the CDM. Have it as a written statement. Let it be known so they don't even waste their time coming to the monastery. Deprive them of all the sanctity that's normally granted anyone, and join the civil disobedience movement. by refusing to collude with the ecosystem of evil. It's a simple act of what I would call, what's the word? Nekama. Restraint. Renunciation, right? Didn't the Buddha tell us in these texts that a nun and a monk isn't a person who shaves her or his head or dons the mahogany-colored robe? A true bhikkhuni and a true bhikkhu, if I get it right, is one who renounces lobha, dosa, moha, greed, anger, and delusion. And collusion is rooted in lobha, dosa, and moha. Restraint. This food was gotten inappropriately. Restraint. This money was gotten inappropriately. Restraint. So restraint as a modernized expression of the Dhamma. This requires the laity around the world, especially in Myanmar, to let us go to a central source and see the EOE, the ecosystem of evil, of Masak. In all the various root, the rezone, we can see, oh, way down here, these are the people who repair his Lamborghinis owned by his grandson. Boycott. No longer participate. Let the pinch be felt. Way back a couple of days ago, the streets of Rangoon and Mandalay and Monhua and Momin and everywhere else in the country, a deathly silence that was so audible around the world, and it was luminous with hope. Let us modernize this Sangha. I had this fantasy, and I'll close with this. You know, I think it was, I'm not sure the date, January 6th. At that time, President Trump was speaking to people near to the White House in Washington, the infamous speech. And the day that a group, so-called, went into the White House, broke into the White House, into the Capitol building, and history was made. Insurrection, it was called. Domestic terrorism became something for American citizens. President Trump was then the vitriol, the rage, the hatred towards he and MAGA, his followers in America, a second impeachment. And I thought about that particular event, January 6th. And if I had, at that time, President Trump's heart and ear, what I would have advised, this is always 2020 in retrospect. I think that really applies looking back here in Burma. When we look back, what would we have done differently? I think it's a very important reflection. But I said, Mr. Trump, you and your innermost people feel there's been election fraud. I'm not going to say right or wrong. You have access to information that I don't have access to. You've got, the nuclear basket. You've got your hands. You could blow up the world. You've got the CIA, the FBI. You've got your followers. You've got access to information. And you're saying the election, there was fraudulence, and that you feel constitutionally that America, out of love of democracy, should investigate this. But what I would recommend here at this moment, because you really would like the honorable members of our Congress and Senate to investigate against the odds of this claim of election fraud. So you want to be on best behavior. You've already been demonized. And what I would recommend at this particular gathering that is being televised around the world, and it's your moment, it's a do or die moment. Encourage the people. Maybe this is far-fetched. to slowly, mindfully, I use the word mindfully. You, sir, on your watch introduced mindfulness through various circuits and people. You introduced mindfulness to our combat troops. It wasn't just about those who came back from combat and were dealing with PTSD and various other forms of trauma, but it was actually proactively used for combat soldiers to more mindfully focus on lethal actions to kill the so-called enemy. You were the one on your watch who brought mindfulness to the forefront of military combat use. And so it behooves you to bring mindfulness intelligently to the people of our country. Take it way out of the monasteries, out of the meditation centers, out of the thought leaders, out of the mindfulness coaches, and on and on and on. Bring it to the forefront of consciousness and mindfully, slowly walk to the Capitol. Please go on, Mr. Clements. This isn't satire, this isn't mockery, this isn't humor. If only, right? I don't want to look back at Burma and go, if only, and lonely. It's been 33 years since '88. We can get it right, we can get it differently. And when they get to the Capitol, rather than going into rowdy and 4 more year mantras, it's a thing called sit down. That's right, sit down, just chill and embody present time awareness of your body and your mind, and send these waves of what we call in Myanmar, in Buddhist cultures, send these cognitive waves of loving kindness, metta, supportive emotions to the people in the Capitol, making one of the hardest decisions of their lives based upon a bias already of hating you, a lot of them, and blow the mind of these elected officials, blow the mind of Americans who hate you, blow the mind of people around the world by a simple act of embodying mindful presence and send thoughts of silent loving kindness to our lawmakers. Sit. Imagine how different the world would be today if we, oh my God, a simple act of physical behavior in a 20-minute period. Imagine 500,000 people sitting in thoughts of loving kindness around America's Capitol building. Today we have, 10, 20, 30,000 armed soldiers with razor wire around the building. Imagine in Burma today, there's 5,000 monasteries, 500,000 monks and nuns. Imagine if there was called the March to Naypyidaw. A meditative, silent, mindful walking meditation of all Sanghas. Those who don't want to come, let them stay behind or let them catch up based on the inspiration. A march to Naypyidaw. Oh my God. Think of what we would see around the world today. In Myanmar today, on CNN and the BBC, New York Times, headlines: the monks and nuns of Myanmar are mindfully embodying the ancient practice of mindfully intelligent walking barefoot to Naypyidaw, the capital of Burma, the enclave of Burma's Bin Laden, Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, and they're going to go as far as they can before they're detained, or the men and women in the armed forces under Massak are like awed. Oh my God. We want to create an OMG moment in Burma. Donald Trump could have created an OMG moment around the Capitol back on January 6th, simply by embodying what people in Burma do for thousands of years, sit and walk in mindfully elegant, dignified, present time presence. And imagine right now we have live coverage of, say, 300,000 monks and nuns, led by the senior Sayadaws and the senior Tilashins, being fed all along the way, the highways and the villages, all converging on Naypyidaw. And what kind of message that would send to Ming Online and to the Thamada. And it would be just like it was back in 88 or 89 when Daw Aung San Suu Kyi was in the South. I think it was down in the Irrawaddy Delta area where soldiers appeared and they knelt, and she told her followers to step aside. If they're going to kill anyone, let them kill me. And that epic moment where she walked towards the soldiers and the commander told his soldiers to shoot, and they didn't. And of course he was fired, and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi walked right through the line of armed soldiers. Isn't that biblical? Isn't that epic? Isn't that a modern day Dhamma Sutta? Isn't that embodied ahimsa in action? Isn't that a radicalized edge of collective civil disobedience, collective Dhamma disobedience, collective Dhamma inaction, disobedience? Isn't this the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path in action in modern civil disobedience? Isn't this supporting the preservation of democracy and freedom and the Sasana in civil disobedience? Isn't the Sangha obligated out of responsibility to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and the future of all Sanghas to act in consorted action and walk and march in peace, in love, in mindfulness to Naypyidaw? May I suggest to the senior monks and nuns all throughout Myanmar, contact each other and set a date. Those soldiers, those participants in Ma Sak's terrorist group will not dare harm, shoot you. You'll see them get on their knees. They will put their guns down. They will weep in tears at the activation of their Hiri and Otapa. This is called the modernization for me, my own humble statement to you, sir and nuns, of Dhamma in modern action. March to Naypyidaw. The people will feed you. The empowerment that the world will feel, a collective action. The civil disobedience movement has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Let the Sangha of Burma be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as a participant in the civil disobedience. The Sangha disobedient movement will also be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Let us create the possibility of the most epic moment of redemption. I say this, create an Angulimala moment in Naypyidaw. Take the sutta into modern times. May I invite you, senior monks and nuns all throughout the country, to declare a date coming up soon, maybe on the Thinjan, the Burmese New Year coming up, April 11th, is it? For 3 days, the march to Naypyidaw, and let the world and social media cover it live. Blow our mind like Donald Trump could have done on January 6th. A few miles away, and all of a sudden, imagine the images of 100,000 followers sitting in mindful metta-based silence around America's capital. That's the equivalent of Mahatma Gandhi walking to the shore and holding up that fist, right? That infamous moment, the Salt March, a hand to the sun that shut down the white supremacist apartheid government of India, of England, shut down Masak, blow their minds through consciousness and conscience in action. If I were Dasu, speaking for Dasu, or Uwin Tin, or Uwin Tain, or Utinu, or any of the beloved people who have suffered in the gulags or behind bars right now, I think that they would celebrate this suggestion that the Sangha declare on Thinjan the march to Naypyidaw. We're going to walk in peaceful, silent support of Burma's civil disobedience movement and all the other things. Make it ungovernable, make dictatorship unworkable, shut off all finances, all money, all time, all energy, and let freedom breathe in Burma. That would be one of the most heroic acts, I think, in modern times. And be sure of it. We around the world, the people around the world, the intelligentsia around the world, the activists around the world, the leaders around the world, you will blow their mind. And you will be nominated for the first time in human history, the Sangha of Burma. The Sangha Disobedience Movement, the SDM, will be nominated along with the CDM for the Nobel Peace Prize. The March to Naypyidaw, April 11th. May it happen. And may victory truly come to the people of Myanmar. Take that step before the Federation of Freedom Fighters unify, before the students, before Gen Z and Gen X and the people of Burma, before they are trained and take up guerrilla tactics as a final expression of nonviolence in radical action. I implore you, leaders of the Sangha, all of you, young Tila Shins, young Koyins, a massive march, even if it's 50,000. Let it grow in numbers like Gandhi's March to the Sea. Stop work. Join the march. And may the lay people let the Sangha breathe. Give the military, give the terrorists no reason to think that it's a protest by the people. Let the Sangha show their Dhamma might. So from my heart to yours, thank you. We're with you, and the war is on. And it's in your hands, beloved monks and beloved monks and nuns in Myanmar.